Well, hey everybody, welcome to Practical Church Planting, where in 15 minutes or less, we'll give you practical tips, advice, and encouragement to help you plant and grow healthy churches. My name is Brandon Drozine, and joining me today, like joining me every other time, is Dylan Dodson.
What's going on, everybody?
And today we're going to give you 5 reasons why you shouldn't multiply small groups.
So here's the thing, whether you call them small groups, community groups like we do, life groups, whatever, the model that people typically talk about is you grow your groups and you multiply them. That's not what we do at New City Church, and we're going to give you 5 reasons why you shouldn't, or why you should consider not, and then we're going to talk about how it works at New City.
Yep.
None of this is new for us. If you buy Larry or go to Larry Osborne's book, Sticky Church, he talks about a lot about this. And not to give you a big history lesson, but long story short, we love the idea of multiplying groups. It doesn't really happen the way that we want to happen. We'll talk about it. And also, the idea of multiplying groups actually came out of South Korea and Asia, and the context is way different there. It's a lot more hospitable. So just think about it this way. It's a lot easier in an American, North American context, probably Western context, to go to a church for the first time instead of going to a small group at somebody's house, because you're like, what is this? If I want to leave, can I get out?
Right.
And so it's a lot harder. We like the idea of making small groups our first step, and that's great for some, but most of the time it's going to be a Sunday morning thing. And so all that being said, you can get the book if you want to learn more. We're going to talk about why we don't do it, some things to think about. Number one, the first reason why to consider not multiplying your groups is so that it actually creates continuity in your groups. Here's what we mean by that. If your groups are always breaking up, or let's say like one church I know, it's like every year, and there's nothing against multiplying groups at all, but their plan is every year groups have to multiply. Well, then what do you do if one group doesn't multiply because they don't have enough people? Are they mad because like the group that had to multiply, they're like, well, I had to leave some of my friends, why didn't you? And it could just be really confusing to create consistency and continuity if you're always trying to multiply groups.
Yep.
Number 2, it allows for deeper relationships, and this one is really, really big, especially, and again, our context today, people individualistic, we're moving all the time, people just don't have friends. Like, we don't have relationships, we don't have friendships, and when you make people multiply groups, it really prohibits them from developing deep relationships to do some of the one another's that God talks about, Jesus talks about in Scripture, like holding each other accountable, praying for things that are going on in your life, with sin, grieving, celebrating. You can't do that with people you don't really know. And when you multiply groups, you make it really hard for people who finally have a consistent friend group that they see on a consistent basis. Now that has to change.
Yeah, another thing to go along, especially with the continuity and everything, is people, sometimes it'll take groups and take people a while to kind of let their guard down, be more comfortable sharing during group. I mean, we've had groups that it took months. It took a long time for people to get comfortable with each other. And so to spend all that time of whether you do a year or however many months of them finally getting comfortable enough to share, to then say, all right, we're going to put you in a different group, I think just does way more harm than good.
And I don't have a study on this, but in my anecdotal experience, it takes about 6 to 9 months for a group to really start to grow and grow connected, and it be more, not just like a Bible study thing, but an actual friend thing.
Yeah. That
you actually like the people that you're in group with. And so when you're multiplying groups, you really prohibit that from happening. Number 3 goes along with it, is that people, not only do they not have deep friendships, but people need friends.
Yeah.
And when you allow them to, again, get into a group with the same people over the course of however long they live and go to your church, it allows them to have friends. It means they're going to be much more likely to be connected into the life of your church, especially the bigger you get, because it's harder for people to have friendships. People don't know that these are my friends, that I can get to know them. Again, people don't know where to, especially today, if you outside of your work, where do you go to find new friends?
Right.
Like, it's really hard to do it.
Yeah.
And so the church, one of the great things about the church is we have a great opportunity to provide friendships for people to build relationships with one another. Again, to do the things that Jesus has called us to do. But in order to do that, you've got to have a relationship and you got to have friendship. And so when we're making people change groups every 6 months, a year, it's really hard to have friends. And you also feel like, what's the point? Because I know I'm going to leave my group.
Yeah, and in reality, it takes time to build like meaningful friendships and relationships, not just good acquaintances, but people that you actually go to when in times of difficulty or trouble. It takes time to build that. And so to put people together and then end up splitting them up, it's going to be hard for people to build that, meaningful relationship, meaningful friendship.
That's good. Now, number 4, again, we're not saying it's bad or by any means. It's just something to consider. 4th reason why you should consider possibly not multiplying your groups is that what it does is it actually penalizes the healthy groups. So it penalizes the people that are committed to being there. Because what happens, the groups that are growing are the groups that are the people that are committed to being there and are pouring into one one another, doing the things that you want people to do.
Yeah.
And so if they know, okay, if I commit to this group, if I build deep relationships, if I build friendships, if I build continuity, to know at the end of the year, I'm going to be, we wouldn't say this word, they wouldn't say this word, but I'm going to be penalized. Like I'm going to be pulled out of my friendships and my situation to start something new. It's just really hard psychologically to keep doing that year after year after year. And it kind of honestly might make you want to pull away or not try as hard because you know, hey, I'm going to get to know these people. It's going to take 6 to 9 months. And then half of them, if not more than half of them, are going to leave.
Yep.
Number 5 is it is extremely hard to actually multiply groups well. Not saying it doesn't happen. I'm sure there's a lot of examples that you could give me. But in my personal experience in the churches I've been a part of and the churches I know about, I don't know a single church that does this well consistently over the majority of their groups. Everybody loves the concept of this. What normally happens is that people just have their churches growing, and so they're starting new groups, and they're saying, look, we're multiplying groups. You're not multiplying groups. You're starting new groups with new people. That's great.
Which is great.
But you're not actually multiplying groups. And so to put this pressure, especially on group leaders and people who, if we're being honest, are not thinking about ministry 24/7 because they've got jobs, they've got their own thing, to put this pressure on them that not only do they need to lead your groups however you do it and build relationships, but they also need to multiply. It can become a lot for your group leader, can make them feel like a failure. And it really essentially, it penalizes them, again, like we said, and it's just hard to do. Not to say just because something's hard, you shouldn't do it, but in my experience, it causes a lot of stress and it doesn't really happen, right?
Yeah.
And so again, those are...
And I think one of the, maybe not the biggest, but one of the reasons that we kind of shy away from doing something like this is because we kind of have the thought of, all right, we'll get to how we run things in a minute and like capping groups and things like that. But say if I'm part of a group that is capped out, number wise, then I can't invite people to it. Right. Or what am I going to do with my neighbor who wants to join my group? Which, like, in an ideal world, sure, it'd be great if we could all just invite endless people. But you're right. At the end of the day, we're not inviting people to groups before inviting them to church, or at least they're not coming to groups before they come to church. So I think that's more of an issue that we make up than is actually a real life issue.
Yeah. And so how does this work? Again, multiplying groups is great if you can do it, but in my experience, it doesn't work that well. And this is not like I don't want people are like, well, if you don't multiply groups, people are just going to get comfortable. I don't think if they're actually living on mission, they're going to get that comfortable. But just to be honest, I would rather someone be a little comfortable than constantly like having to get new friends and it never going anywhere.
Yeah.
And so let's talk about how this works. To answer this, we could go on and on, but we want to keep this in 15 minutes or less. So we'll talk about how we do this at New City Church. One of the things, like you said, is we cap groups, whether it's 12, 14, 16. I wouldn't do more than 16, especially if it's a singles group. Couples, you can kind of do a little bit more because they kind of agree with each other a lot of times, but like 14 singles is a lot in a group. So we have, whatever that number is, you cap it, which means once you get past that group, no new people can join. Now, if someone moves away, that's different. But once you get this group, people know this is my group, these are my friends. I'm not constantly having to meet someone new, and I don't know this person, they don't know me, and so we have to start over every time we have someone new, which is like every other week. Mm-hmm. They know that these are my friends, these are people that I trust, that I can go deep with, that I can share my anxieties with, my sin with, my victories. I can share that with it. So again, what that just means is once you have a certain number in your group, you don't offer that group anymore. And it may be difficult because you always want to connect someone to a group, which leads to the next point. How do you do this? People need to know that no is not a permanent no. So let's say all your groups are capped, which isn't likely, but they need to know like, hey, we're going to open groups up again in 2 or 3 months. There's nothing worse than asking to be in a group and then not only getting a no, but then getting no next step.
Right.
And so it's not just like, oh, we don't have any room for you. Try to direct them to another group. If that doesn't work for whatever reason, say, hey, we're opening up group enrollment again, or however you do it in a month, 2 months, 3 months, whatever it is, so they know that it is coming. But I like what you said. We like the idea of inviting friends and adding new people, but it doesn't happen as much as we like to say it was. And so it just allows people to know this is my group. I can go deep with it. Another way we do it is that instead of, so what do you like? Okay, so how do we make new groups? Instead of creating new groups, you send leaders.
Yeah. So
you send a couple or a leader or two from one group to start a new group. I'll give you my personal experience, especially if you're a church leader. You know, Christina and I, my wife, have led a lot of groups. And so what happens in the groups that we've led in the past that got too big, we say the word multiply because it sounds better than split.
Right.
However you want to say it. And so in order to get people to go to the new group, because everybody's friends, like nobody wants to leave, is that we would kind of put all the people that we were friends with and that was close in the new group. And then all of our friends were gone so that we could start over. And like, let's just be honest, ministry is hard enough as it is. Especially if you're a church leader, you need to be able to have friends that you can relate to and talk with as well. And that's really important. And so a lot of times what has to happen is you split the group and it's like nobody really wants to do it. And so you're like trying to play the game of like who's going to go in this group and who's going to go in that group. And then you're lucky if both groups survive, if even one survives. And so instead of sending out groups, like splitting them in half, you send out leaders and say, and here's the thing, here's the great thing about sending out leaders. If you have someone in one of your groups that wants to go, let them make that decision say like, oh, I don't, don't force someone out. But you were saying, like, let's say your group's big, people want to invite friends. Well, guess what? They can start a new group, and it's their decision. They're not being forced, which is a really big thing.
Yeah.
And then also here, we're not, let's be honest, like New City's not a big, huge church. We're a year and a half in or less. So it's a little harder for us to do, but what Larry Osborne talks about in Sticky Church is you're creating new church or new groups for new people. Because the reality is, whether you're super outgoing or super introverted, we all have certain, I think the word is like Lego, like Legos, you can like connect them, whatever.
Yeah.
Connectors. You all have a certain amount of connectors, whether that's 20 or 5 or whatever it is. After a while, you can't have any more friends. Like you can't keep up with that many people.
Yeah.
And oftentimes new people want to meet new people so they don't feel like everyone has like these jokes I don't know about. And so what to do is, if you have a lot of new people, you create new groups for new people. You don't multiply your groups or split your groups. You take leaders that want to lead, you call leaders out, and you allow them to say, here's a bunch of new people, here's 6 new people, here's 8 new people, and you can lead this new group, as opposed to multiplying and splitting the groups in half, and everyone kind of is not happy about it.
Yeah. I think that's good. I think at the end of the day, a lot of what this comes back to is that we need people to be vulnerable in groups. And that's very difficult if people are changing in the groups. If you've ever been in a small group and someone new comes, or someone does invite someone, they do show up. It always seems like that's the week where everyone's like giving the very superficial answers. People aren't actually engaging, because it takes time to build that. It takes time to build trust, and that's the biggest thing, is trust with each other, to be able to let your guard down and be vulnerable. So by the time that actually happens, to then say, all right, you're going with another group, you're just never going to get those types of relationships. That's really what people, not just for the health of the church, but that's what people need in life, is those types of relationships.
And again, nothing wrong with multiplying groups. It's a great thing. When I kind of learned about this model, just to be honest, it took a lot of pressure off.
Yeah.
Of like, you know what, I can do groups this way. You already feel like a lot of pressure as a church leader, and then you feel like a failure because you're not multiplying a million groups. Like there's other ways to do it. There's nothing wrong with multiplying, but maybe if anything, this just gives you a way to think about it. It takes the pressure off. And lets you know, hey, people want to build deep relationships. And I don't know this to be the case for all of our groups, but we're just a little over a year into this thing. And I'll tell you, our group, because we've been together for over a year now, like the conversations that we've had, they're not comfortable conversations. Like we talk a lot about New City and how we can reach more people and things that we can do, because we're all part of the same body. We know we're going to be here for one another. And in my experience, it has gone really well for us, and who knows what the future holds. But since we've gone to this model, I don't regret it at all.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, there are different ways to do this.
Yep.
There are ways to do it without multiplying groups. Like I've been part of groups before that they have a certain enrollment period. This isn't necessarily how we do things here, but there's a certain enrollment period, and when that's done, all groups are capped. All groups are closed until the next one, so that people can build those relationships. So there's not just one way to do things, but we think at the end of the day, it's better to not constantly be dividing groups.
Yep. And the opposite of not dividing is just adding a bunch of people to the same group. But once you have like 20 people, that's not helpful either.
Yeah.
So again, there's a lot of great ways to do it. However you do it, that's great. Just want to give you another perspective and say, hey, this is how it's worked for us. It's a little different than a lot of people say, but in our experience, it has not created laziness. It has not created comfortable Christianity. It's created people that are actually growing deeper because they're building relationships with the same people over a long period of time.
Yep.
And so that's 5 reasons, again, why you should consider not multiplying your groups. Thanks for being with us. If you have questions about this or anything else about church planting that you want us to answer in a future episode, head to practicalplanting.com/questions. And until then, we'll see you next time on Practical Church Planting. Thanks so much for watching this episode of Practical Church Planting. Whether you're watching on Facebook or YouTube or Practical Planting, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, make sure you like or subscribe or do whatever it's telling you to do or should do on that platform.
And hey, if you are so tired of looking at our ugly faces, but you're not tired of listening to our beautiful voices, then you can find our podcast if you just search Practical Church Planting on iTunes or Google Play. Make sure not to just find it, not just to listen, but to subscribe.
Make sure you subscribe. Brian, tell them to subscribe.
Subscribe.
See you next time.